listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, the suicide crisis crippling our construction industry. Find out why these workers are nearly twice as likely to take their own lives compared to other employed men, and the new efforts trying to clean up these often toxic workplaces and keep employees safe. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Friday, the 22nd of August. The federal government has announced a major overhaul of childcare centre regulations after shocking allegations of child sex abuse. Federal, state and territory education ministers met in Sydney today, agreeing to a $189 million reform package. It includes a CCTV trial across hundreds of small and medium operators, as well as a new national register of childcare workers, with a pilot to begin in December ahead of a full rollout next year. Other measures also include banning mobile phones in centres from next month and mandatory national child safety training for all workers, plus an additional 1,600 spot checks by federal inspectors. Here is Federal Education Minister Jason Clare.
All Australians have been shocked and sickened. And there's a group of Australians who are just as shocked, just as angry, just as broken as every other Australian, and that's the incredible people who work in our early education and care system. Hundreds of thousands of them who love our kids, who care for our kids, who educate them, who dedicate their life to this, one of the most important jobs in the world.
Australian sunscreen brand Violette is pulling one of its most popular products from shelves after new testing cast doubt on its sun protection claims. The company says its lean screen SPF mattifying zinc sunscreen will be withdrawn after results showed it couldn't guarantee the SPF 50 plus on the label. Consumer Group Choice tested 20 sunscreens earlier this year and found 16 failed to meet their advertised SPF levels. Lean Screen was the worst performer, coming back with an SPF of just 4. At the time, Ultraviolet strongly defended its product, citing lab tests showing SPF ratings above 60. But new testing at alternative labs has returned a range of results ranging from SPF 4 to 64, forcing today's voluntary withdrawal. And Erik Menendez has been denied parole despite a reduced sentence, making him eligible for release after more than 3 decades behind bars for murdering his parents. A panel of Californian commissioners rejected his bid, delaying parole eligibility for another 3 years. Officials say the decision was based on Erik's behaviour in prison rather than the severity of the crime. His older brother and co-defendant Lyle Menendez will face a parole hearing on Friday local time at the same San Diego prison. The Menendez brothers were convicted of murdering their parents in their Beverly Hills home in 1989 and sentenced to life without parole. Now it's time to get into our deep dive over the concerning rate of suicide in the construction industry. Every second day, one Australian worker in the sector dies by suicide. And while the rates are starting to fall, experts say more needs to be done to tackle key issues in the often troubled industry and the mental health of employees. One of those groups making a real difference is Mates in Construction. Board member Tony LaMontagne, who was also a professor of work health and wellbeing at Deakin University, joins us to explain how they're helping to save lives. And a warning, the content in this interview may be confronting for some listeners. Tony, thanks so much for joining us. These statistics regarding the suicide crisis in the construction industry are incredibly confronting. Every year, 190 Australians working in the construction industry die by suicide. That breaks down to around one worker every second day.
Yeah, that's right. It is quite confronting, and it's really disturbing. And, it's been going on for a long time. It was worse 20 years ago. It's slowly getting better, which is the good news in this story. But, yeah, it's very full on very full on.
So in regards from your research and the work that you've done with this industry and this suicide, massive issue within this industry, what are the factors behind this?
Well, there's a few. For one, when you look at men versus women, men are much more likely to die by suicide than women in Australia and internationally, about 3 to 1. And construction is a predominantly male industry. And so it's partly the composition of the workforce that it's predominantly male, and so it's higher risk for that reason compared to other industries, which are more balanced, for example, in terms of males and females or gender balance. Another is the nature of the work. The work is pretty hard work. It involves a lot of job insecurity, periods of unemployment between projects, for example, particularly in commercial construction and even residential. You're going project to project to piece together your income. And that's insecure and precarious, and that wears on people. It wears on your mental health. It's a risk factor for depression and burnout and other things. In addition, you have some cultural issues in the industry where it traditionally has been a traditional masculine sort of culture where tough guys and, we don't need help. And if you admit weakness, then, you're taking a big chance. That's slowly changing in the industry, but that type of masculinity that has historically been normative, if you will, the norm, that doesn't help because it discourages people who are in distress from seeking help. And that's one of the things that the strategies to try to mitigate this problem is built around.
You mentioned earlier in 2025 today, the situation with suicide, although it's still huge considering one construction worker is taking their life every 2 days, it is better today than what it was many years ago. Why?
Well, we can't claim direct evidence as to why, so we have to look at what's happened nationally across all of society. So a few things. First of all, to ask that question, we have to look at our suicide statistics, which we've done. And nationally, over the last 20 years, we started much higher, double the rate that we're at now. What has changed? Well, quite a lot. For one, there's been enormously more attention to mental health as an issue societally. We've had the Beyond Blue initiative, some aspects of the Beyond Blue programs and other population-level mental health promotion programs have been about the particular needs of men versus women, or young people versus old people, and some of that work has been tailored, which would help with the construction context. We've had improvements in mental health care. And so when we look at the whole national picture, we have to ask, what's happened nationally? And with Mates in Construction, which is a suicide prevention charity, a program tailored to the construction industry, that has reached over 1/3 construction workers in Australia, which is astounding. But that's still only 1/3 of the workforce. There's nearly 1 million construction workers here in Australia. So we can't claim it's all the Mates program, for example, but there are other similar initiatives, such as Blue Hats, that's modeled very much on the Mates program that operates in Victoria. Mates operates in Queensland, New South Wales, WA, and Northern Territory and New Zealand, but not universally. So it's a combination of all those things, and possibly the changing culture of masculinity has helped. Men in general are more likely now to seek help if they're having issues. And in the Mates program, what we see is we equip people in the Mates program to help individuals who are acutely in distress. But most of the help that's obtained through that program in the construction sector is way upstream of a crisis. So it's about gambling issues, alcohol and other drugs, relationships. That's where we want to be intervening early, because we know that, the sooner people get help, the better the outcomes.
So just expanding on that point, Tony, you mentioned these great charities that are doing huge amounts of work in regards to really tackling this issue. Expand on that when you say if a worker has alcohol or drug problems or relationship problems, that's just as much as the issue as where they're working or what industry, correct?
Yeah. So people have these problems all over the place, not just in construction. But the way the Mates program works, it's fairly unique. It's an industry-based solution. So the industry came up with this response, not experts like me, the researchers. Large commercial construction builders and unions in the area came together in Queensland in 2007. There was a study done that showed quite dramatically higher suicide rates in construction workers. And they got around a table and said, we have to do something about this collectively. And that's when MATES was formed as a charity jointly controlled by labor and management. As you know, the construction industry can be contentious, right? This we know. But when it came to suicide, there's great cooperation. I sit on the MATES board as a subject matter expert around the table with trade union representatives and employer representatives. And we get along and we focus on the suicide problem. And so this is an enormous success of cooperation, I would say, in that regard, because there is a contrasting narrative out there that, people never get along in construction. Well, that's not entirely true. And MATES is living proof of that. So what MATES does is it goes on site and it does a general awareness training, a 1-hour thing, and it says to people, look, this is happening. This is not right that we have an elevated rate. That's an injustice. So that sparks motivation. It sparks anger, outrage. What do we do about it? Well, talk to a connector. What's a connector? That's somebody who's a workmate who gets a half-a-day training on how to connect somebody who's maybe having problems to the help they might need. And those people volunteer at the first training and they're co-workers. We target having around 1 in 20 workers trained that way, such that you're talking to somebody who looks like you, talks like you, thinks like you. You're not going out to a clinic. A lot of people, when you have to make the move to picking up the phone to your GP or going to a clinic or something, just go, too hard, too much. This is MATES talking to MATES. So the MATES program, so used the word too many times already, is about mateship in construction. It's about, the strong man is the man who looks after his mate, not the man who denies that he's having problems and lets them fester until he's in crisis. And it's trying to change that narrative and collectivize responsibility for suicide in the industry by jointly putting together, labor and management, employers and unions to address the problem. And this is offered from a neutral ground, right? So it's not the employer you're going to, it's not the union you're going to. It's to a neutral ground, and the professional staff who work for MATES are almost universally people from the industry who look and talk like you as a construction worker, and most of them have lived experience of either suicidality or severe mental health problems. And so you're talking to people who understand where you're coming from, and that seems to make an enormous difference in construction workers' willingness to ask for help. Or you can nudge your connector and say, listen, Joe over there, he's not right. I think he had a problem over the weekend in his relationship. Can you go have a word with him? So you might get nominated by your mates. So the general awareness training, the initial training is about, well, be aware. And, if anybody has problems, talk to the connector. You can recognize them. They get a sticker on their hard hat, particular colored sticker. You can pick them out, go have a word. Doesn't have to be formal. It may result in nothing, or it may result in a conversation that leads to somebody getting the help they need. And the sooner the better. And that's how it works. And then you can also train people on site who have more advanced skills in intervening in a crisis, and they're supported by a field officer that is a professional staff member of MATES. So that's how the MATES program works, and it was designed by the sector for the sector, and that's why I think it's had such great reach and impact.
So, Tony, if I can ask you, it's the chicken or the egg scenario, right? You could actually say to somebody, is this an industry that in some circumstances, as we know, has issues with bullying? It is quite a male-dominated industry, and there are also the instability with the work. So is it a situation where maybe it should be more of a preventative scenario where we prevent this unhealthy workplace in some circumstances rather than trying to fix a problem?
Yes, both. So MATES came at it from a reactive end, from the suicide end, and has come forward. And in recent years, MATES has developed precisely the sorts of programs you're talking about. Bullying is a particular problem among apprentices being bullied, that is. And MATES has designed a particular new part of their program, which workplaces can choose to bring on site, where you make supervisors aware of their responsibilities around preventing bullying. You make apprentices aware of what their rights are and where to go for help if they experience bullying. And you do general talks to the rest of the workforce saying, don't tolerate this. You see this happening, step in. Just like bystander intervention in racism, similar idea. You don't be a bystander. Don't be passive if you see this happening. This is wrong. Don't say, oh, I went through it, so they got to go through it too. That sort of stuff is still around with some people, but it's on the wane, which is really good. So the more the MATES program has evolved, the further upstream it's going. Ideally, we would be intervening on job insecurity and psychosocial factors at work, and to some extent that is happening. And by promoting a sense of belonging and a connection between workers through the MATES program, to the extent that it does that, it's providing people with a buffer against the stresses of the job. Everyone in their job, it's a sort of a weighing up of the rewards and the effort that you have to put in, or what you have to put up with sometimes at work in order to do your job. And the more you can emphasize the positive aspects of that job, and there's a lot of pride to be had in building things. You step back and you go, I built that. That's quite a nice thing. And so that, finding ways to promote the positive aspects of work, which MATES tries to do through a sense of belonging and mateship and looking after each other. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect at work. These are the things that MATES tries to do.
We really appreciate your time, Tony. Thanks so much for joining us. That was Tony LaMontagne. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'll be back tomorrow with the weekend briefing. And on tomorrow's episode, Antoinette is joined by Natalie Kyriakou.
Charles Darwin used to refer to females of a species as wives, and he thought men were superior. And so he never really looked at the females of a species. So when we're talking about how, men are like wolves and dominant, it's because Charles Darwin only studied the male of a species and looked at, a small amount of species. He didn't actually look at all of the other species like hyenas where females are dominant, or whales where female knowledge is, an incredible part of their strength as a species. So it's helped us realise that there is actually bias in the way that we understand evolution, and also bias in the way that we understand our social interactions today between men and women.
We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. See you next time.